Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. We've got a special occasion today because a while back I was on a channel from Young Earth Creationist called PTown, and then things ensued in the comment section, and that's pretty much why we're here. So let me introduce our guests for today. Dr. Josh Bowen. People probably everyone who watches this channel already knows who Dr. Josh is. And P-Town, yeah, Dr. Josh, do you want to do a quick introduction for maybe that one person that doesn't know you already? Oh,
I can hear you
the
fine.
the button didn't take. So now we should be okay.
Yeah, so he was just asking me what it is that makes me so unbelievably amazing. I think this is what the question was. So
I think that's what it was. Well, I know
no, they
I know
probably
of one thing. The one thing was the bow tie because I saw a tweet somewhere. I hope he's wearing his bow tie. So
right. This is my new thing, you know. Megan's been sort of helping me find my style after all these years. So um yeah, the bow tie is my Doctor Who, apparently Bill and I the Science Guy mix. So yeah.
yeah, and
But
I'll save you from having to demonstrate it, but it is a bow tie. It's not a clip on, which you demonstrated last time we were on the stream. So it is a
if
real.
I remember, I'll undo it toward the end.
Okay. Yeah. So,
But you asked me, my like, I guess my intro to introduce myself. So I was just saying that I'm an Assyriologist. I do Hebrew Bible stuff, ancient Near East stuff. My wife runs Digital Hammurabi, and that's sort of the sort of thing that we do. I do a lot of sort of counter apologetics here online. But yeah, that's basically it.
and every once in a blue moon, you talk about slavery. Which...
yes, periodically it seems to come up every once in a while.
Okay, P-Town.
And I'm
tell people who you are.
well, I'm just a dude. I guess I would categorize myself as a businessman, former atheist. Well, I grew up in not a Christian home. Was a somewhat of a vocal atheist. I would define it as an atheist. I was self-described that way. I've been a Christian, I would guess about 10 years now, maybe 12. But I really fell in love with the Bible, I'd say about 7 years ago. And in the last 4 months, I've been calling in and talking to atheists about what I believe and why. And on one of those calls, after a few too many, I stumbled into you, Dr. Josh. I can't remember which stream it was on, but I remember saying, had I known I was going to talk to I don't know, a double doctorate in Assyriology, I probably wouldn't have called into a stream like that. But yeah, I remember. I apologize on my channel. I was trying to remember what blew up, but it was in a dumpster fire, and I believe I asked you a question whether or not you believe that the scriptures say that it's a global flood, or if it's a local flood, and you said, "Oh, you mean like flat Earth?" And I at the time was like, "Here we go," and then you knew I misunderstood you, but the dumpster fire just took over the room, and you didn't get a chance to clarify with me, and that was where the misunderstanding was rooted. But Yeah, no, for me, I'll be honest with you. I don't know how deep we're going to be able to go, because ancient Near East studies is, quite frankly, about the most boring thing in the world to me. And I know that I need to get more affluent in that subject, but um,
Well, I may be I
when
may
I
be
ran
able
into
I may be able to help with that before we start the conversation and I disappear off screen. People in chat can ask questions. Please tag me in, as it says in the pinned tweet. But we already have our first question for Dr. Josh from Angers. Question for Dr. Josh. The way Song of Solomon reads to me, it sounds like euphemisms, metaphors for pedophilia and incest. Is that how it reads in the original language? Okay, that's a new one.
So I'd want to know maybe a little more about the question. So as far as the incest part, I don't think so. Of course, I haven't translated through Song of Solomon in probably over a decade. It's one of those books that you don't end up going to. At least I don't end up going to all that often. The pedophilia side, I'm imagining, is just young woman sort of angle. And so from our modern perspective, would we say underage girl, that sort of thing? Yeah, probably. But I would take what I say here with caution, given that I'd want to have gone down and gone and read through the secondary literature and obviously through the text itself again. But as far as the incest angle, I mean, nothing jumps out at me. Now, there is somebody that has written recently on Song of Solomon, and of course, I can't remember the name of the person. But if you email me, I can go back through my notes and find that book. But that was probably the most unsatisfying response that anyone has ever given, ever. Probably. Sorry.
Well, I can chime in on that. I use it frequently, actually, because according to my limited understanding of the text, there are some sexual positions in that, and so I tend to teach people. But I'm Dutch. I mean, we're all about sex and sin and everything. So that's my excuse. We'll get into the conversation. I'll disappear. I only come back when there are questions from the chat, and so the floor is yours.
Well, what I was going to say, Josh, is sometimes I run into Christian apologists, and somehow now I've kind of become an apologist in some way. I don't even like the word, to be honest with you, but run into some who will contend that scriptures say that there's a local flood, and among other things, which I just think are just clearly not correct. So it's just a qualifying question that I have for people who are in ancient Near East studies who are Christians. But that's how you and I met.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any question at all, really, that it's talking about a worldwide flood. I mean, I don't know how it would do it any other way. And I've interacted. I think my first debate online was I don't know if it was specifically on that topic, but it was certainly on the flood. And yeah, I mean, outside of the biblical text, just reading it as it stands in the narrative. If you go back to Atrahasis or the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is where the biblical flood traditions are pulling from, there's just no question that it's talking about wiping out all of humanity. It's the whole point.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I understand, I guess, why people would want to do that. If you're coming at it, I guess, and science is certainly not my background at all. But I guess if you're coming at it from like a scientific angle and you're trying to, reconcile what the text says with what we, can say about, worldwide floods, then, you'd want to make it something more local. But yeah, I mean, from a narrative standpoint, I don't know how you'd do it.
Right. And I would contend that, of course, I would have the position that the Epic of Gilgamesh and those other texts come out of what the Bible says. But I'm not an Assyriologist.
Well,
so I don't know how far we would go.
Well, let's talk about it for a sec, because I mean, like, this is, to be clear, I had a very, very good friend going through seminary, and he and I were like in all the same Hebrew classes, and we were always pushing for like a more advanced Semitics class. And when I went off to Hopkins, he went to Dallas Theological Seminary. And I remember talking to him when he was just about done his dissertation, and I hadn't talked to him in several years. And we were just catching up, and I don't remember the context of it, but I remember asking him. I deconverted by that point.
Mhm.
And I asked him, well, like, what do you make of the fact that, as we're talking about here, that you have, whichever way you want to see literary dependence going, you have very clear connections between, the biblical flood story and what you see in Atrahasis and the Epic of Gilgamesh. And his response was, and this is a PhD, Dallas Theological Seminary, so he's no dummy, right? His response was, well, I think that, the Mesopotamian flood traditions are like Satan's corrupted versions. And the biblical tradition preserves, like the truth. So obviously I disagree with that, but to be, charitable here to the position, he's not a stupid person. And he holds that position, somebody with a PhD. So, I mean, it's not like this is that position's not like totally out of left field or something. But one of the things that I would say is, or that I guess I would encourage you to read about, is one, when the flood traditions in Mesopotamia and in the ancient Near East in general, when do they come into the literary tradition? When do we find them? Because, and PTown, please stop me if I start rambling on. Just like throw a flag up and say, "Whoa, buddy," because I will. I'll just keep talking. But we have, the earliest evidence that we have of the flood traditions are coming into the literary, the scribal schools literary tradition, is in the early second millennium BCE. And what that means, practically speaking, the problem that I think someone who sees an actual,
Would that be like 1900 BC or?
yeah, that, right around there. Yeah.
Okay.
1900, 1800, somewhere around there. And the problem that I think that presents is, we have writing and culture throughout the third millennium. So, from 2999 down to 2000 BCE, like, we have very consistent textual evidence, and archaeological evidence. And as far as the biblical timeline is concerned, I think most people that argue for like a young earth creationist position, young earth flood, would say that it happens sometime in the third millennium, usually around the middle of the third millennium.
Mhm.
And I think outside of the problem of culture continuing right on through the third millennium uninterrupted, is this problem with the flood tradition, because the flood tradition, if it doesn't start until, right around 2000 or a little bit later, you'd have to argue that people knew about it for 500 years and didn't say anything about it, didn't write anything about it, even though they had literary traditions, like we have them, texts from the from the third millennium. They just didn't say anything about it. They didn't write anything about it until 500 years later, and then they wrote several different literary texts about it. So I think that's something to consider, I guess, in that position.
Well, just because you haven't found any documents that they didn't write about it, I don't know. But I just want to agree with you that I think that when it comes to the actual physical manuscripts, documents like the Epic of Gilgamesh, I have no I can't. I mean, there's no contest on my end. Those documents are going to be older than the Hebrew Bible documents. That's quite obvious, right?
Yeah, and it's more complicated than that because
Mhm.
like we don't really have Hebrew as a language like developing really until what, like the 10th century at the earliest. I mean, I think most of it it's not my specific area of specialization linguistically, but like 9th century is usually when we start to, I think, see things, but certainly not much earlier than the 10th. And there are people that would argue that things like Exodus 15 with the that Song of the Sea, where the Egyptian army is destroyed, that might go back to like the 11th century, like the tradition itself might go back to the 11th century, even though I think that's probably a little early. But I mean, like we have texts from Canaan, lots of them. I mean, lots, relatively speaking. We have texts from Canaan during that period, 14th century, 13th century. So it's not like there's nobody there. It's not like there aren't traditions in the region. It's just that Israel didn't form until like the end of the 13th century. So Israel really wasn't a thing until the end of the 13th century. So
Well, let me. I don't. Sorry to jump back here, but I just wanted to kind of paint a picture from my perspective here.
Sure.
And even though all the atheists don't want to bring me into their court, I was an atheist. I believed in evolution, big time scales. So when you approach the scriptures that way, there's a humans have been around for, I don't know, however far back you want to count, pretty much, and consider whatever monkey's a human. But what I see is that this huge blossoming of civilization right about the time that the Bible says it's going to be, even though maybe according to our modern archaeological evidence or what we think we know, and by other means, linguistic or otherwise, it might be off. It might be, oh well, what about these 500 years? Well, keep in mind we're talking when you look at it from a larger perspective. I think the accuracy is prevalent, of course, but I understand. So that's where I hang my hat, just because I don't know all the details.
Sure. Could you be, just so I know what like what specifically you're referring to? And by the way, just so everybody watching knows, PTown and I really didn't have like a set thing that we were going to talk
Right.
about. It was just supposed to be like a conversation. So if it seems like we're, just sort of going back and forth to try to figure out which direction to go, totally not what we're doing. It is what we're doing. But when you say like
I can give you an analogy if you
yeah,
want.
please, that'd be great.
And I think it's a fair one, because if you look at everyone's going to love this. Look at the trees, but again, what you have is, when it comes to the age of the earth, and again, and I do categorize myself as what they call a young earth creationist, because I affirm to the Bible, and I do think that there's sufficient evidence to believe that. I think that it's more probable, from what I've been exposed to, that the Bible is correct and it's evidence based. But if you, for example, if you look at the trees and you do all the rings, right? I find it very uncanny that the oldest trees correlate with the age of what the Bible said the earth would be. And that's in the same sense. And again, it might not be a perfect science, but what you have is this, you have civilization, and it's spreading out around the world, or just popping up, presumably, basically pops up about the same time, and the record it corroborates with the Bible.
So help me out here. Like, what time frame are you talking about when you
Well,
say that
it
civilization
didn't.
pops up?
Well, it wasn't 20,000 years ago,
Okay.
right? You see what I mean? I'm not saying it's from my perspective because I'm not a doctor in Assyriology.
Sure, sure.
I'm looking at it from a bigger, broader standpoint and saying, you know what? The Bible's pretty freaking darn accurate, right? Because in school we're taught, oh, humans have been around for hundreds of thousands of years, and writing's been around for 20, 25, maybe 30. We're always told a new number. So, but when you really somewhat dig your teeth into it, you look and go, oh, the Bible's pretty accurate when it comes to what we presume to be the timeline of civilization.
Okay. So let's go with that for a second.
Okay.
So what we have as far as a timeline is concerned is at the end of the fourth millennium, this is when writing develops. So certainly during like the Halaf period, the Ubay period, back in the fifth millennium, it's not that like nobody existed, right? I mean, we have good archaeological evidence from the period, from those periods. But writing develops, right around 3300 BCE, and we can see the progression of how it develops. And then we start getting literary texts in the third millennium. So during what's called the early dynastic period. And that tradition carries through early dynastic 1, 2, 3, down into the Sargonic period. So right in the middle of the third millennium, you have Sargon of Akkad, and then his kids in the dynasty that follows. Then you have a little bit after that, you have Judea, and then you have the Or
Okay,
three
so
Empire.
you're talking about all these periods that go way, way before anything that I know about, and I
Right,
barely know little, but this
right.
is old stuff, right?
But I guess my point in bringing it all up is that we have continuity both in the textual record, historical record, archaeological record. I mean, like that's not really a debated thing. I mean, you can go back and track writing as it develops from 3300 and just keep right on rolling with it. So, when do you think the flood happened?
I probably need to make a chart to be more specific for you.
Okay.
I don't really have one. But because I'd have to go off of what other people are saying, which I don't really like to do.
I hear you.
But I'm guessing a little over 4,000 years ago. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
that's usually what they say, right? Like,
Okay. You could probably get it down pretty accurately just based off the genealogies in the Bible.
yeah, I mean, if you have that
If
interpretive
that's what you're going
model,
on.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. So if that's the case, like if we assume that to be the case,
Okay.
how would you explain? And this is more probably just a question to think about more than to like put you on the spot or something. But I think something to consider in this is how is it that you have this continuity? I mean, like you can go to a museum today, any museum that has cuneiform documents, like cuneiform tablets,
Yeah.
you're probably going to find a handful from the end of the third millennium, this period called the Or III period. So like best case scenario, if you had a worldwide flood that swept over in the middle of the third millennium, you're talking about at most 400 years to go from 8 people to the Or III Empire. In addition to all the other people that are, on the planet at the time. Like that would be something that I think you'd want to maybe consider, if that
Well,
made sense.
I have. I was very surprised to find out that people lived a lot longer before the flood, and then there's this long period of time after the flood where people started not living as long. So if you operate under the premise that people had a lot more babies back then, mainly because they were fertile for a lot longer, it has quite a different compounding effect. So again, even with knowing that, how do you fit it within 400 years? I don't know. I haven't really gone back and done the work, but when you the few times that I have, I was surprised to see how fast things kind of blossom
So
or
yeah, I
compound.
mean,
Yeah.
I think the problem that you would face,
Right.
and I did a video with Paulogia 2 years ago, maybe, where we did a review of, I think it was Ken Ham's group. I don't remember. But it was about this particular topic, and they had dated fairly precisely when they thought the flood swept over, and it was right, like right around 2400 BCE, which sort of fits with what you're saying. It's probably roughly what you would come up with, given what you've said. And if that's the case, it ended up being that you had to go from 8 people to the Sargonic Empire in like 20 years. And like that's just assuming that Noah, and the other 7 people got off the ark and just started having babies to produce in 20 years the Sargonic Empire, which we have really, really good evidence of, like documentation of. I mean, I'm not a biologist, but I mean, like,
Well, my minimal time studying, which is I only have pretty much a double bachelor, but one thing that I did learn when I was in school is that people can get beating the same drum, and it's really hard to get them to change course. Meaning, I'm very weary, especially if you look at the history of science, and I think that would include archaeology, Dr. Josh. That we've been wrong a lot. It wasn't that long ago that apologists. It's funny, I'm calling myself an apologist. Well, people like you and I were having a completely different discussion. The argument was, oh, there was no writing during Moses' time, right? Those are the guys in your court, I believe. That was not that long ago.
Yeah, I don't know that anybody's ever said that, PTown. I know
Is that not true?
I know that creationists, like not you, but I mean, I know that there was a video that I saw. Who was it? Oh, my brain. There was somebody that we actually did a video response to them, and I cannot remember now for the life of me, but they were like, that was their big premise. So they said that writing didn't exist. That's never been an argument, like ever.
Okay, I am going off of what someone else told me.
Yeah. They
or
might be
probably a YouTube
conflating
video.
and saying maybe they're thinking that Hebrew was not a language at the time. If that's the case, then yes, that is a true statement. But like, I don't know, that wouldn't have any bearing on something like the Exodus. But what I will say, and to sort of push back a little bit, is that you're right. It would have been a very different conversation 60 years ago, but I don't think it would go in the direction that you'd like. Because 60 years ago, people were saying, well, yeah, sure. I mean, like, the Bible is basically historically reliable, right? Even at my William Foxwell Albright, there's like a big portrait of him staring down at us in our big conference room at Hopkins, because he's like this presence, this former presence. But even he, who I suspect you would say he is very, very liberal. Even he was saying, well, yeah, sure. I mean, like, the Hebrew Bible is basically historically reliable, but nobody would say that now. And nobody outside of, like, people that I think that have theological commitments to the text. Because, and I write about this in my second volume of the Atheist Handbook, is something like the Conquest account. I mean, you had Christian scholars, Christian archaeologists going out and digging these sites in Palestine.
Did I lose you?
Specifically to
Oh,
did I?
Is it me or is it you?
I think it
Everyone?
stopped for both of us, yeah, for a second.
Okay.
but I don't know what you heard, but like Christian archaeologists were out there digging these sites, and coming back and going, shoot, like the stuff that we need to be here is not here. And so what's happened is, and I'll shut up after this, but I'll just give one example. In Exodus 12:37, you have a statement as the Israelites are getting ready to leave Egypt in the Exodus, and it says that 600,000 men on foot, like fighting men on foot, left. And so when you when you account for women and children, you're talking about like 2.5-3 million people estimated. Well, somebody like James Hoffmeyer, who is an evangelical scholar out at Trinity in Deerfield, Illinois, who is an Egyptologist, who believes in the historicity of the Exodus, when he writes in his book, he's like, yeah, we know there couldn't have been that many people. I mean, we know that there was only 2.5-3 million people in all of Egypt at that time. So it can't mean 600,000 people. It's got to mean something else.
Well, we're almost there. I'm in R and Rob's Bible study on Saturdays. We're almost to chapter 12, and I plan. And again, it's like just a really boring topic to me. Go into the historicity like that. But I'm gonna have to dive into it in more detail.
Yeah, a really good book that I think is slanted your way. Probably is it's a 2021 publication, I think, and it's not that long. It's pretty easy read. It's called, not that you would need an easy read, but I mean, just for people hearing that, it's like, oh my god, I got to read another book.
Well, I'm listening to yours. I'm falling asleep to it like 10 times. The first volume 1.
Okay.
The Atheist Handbook. Yeah.
There you go. But if you do need to dive into the Exodus, it's called I think it's called 5 Views on the Exodus, but it's an evangelical publication. And Hoffmeyer has a chapter, Stripling has a chapter, like the very conservative chapter, and then I can't remember who does the other. Rensburg, I think. But
I think, is it me again or
no? We lost Dr. Josh.
Okay. We got him back.
Okay.
Yeah, you're
sorry.
What's the name of the book?
It's called 5 Views on the Exodus.
Okay.
Sorry, is it me? I hope it's not me.
Yeah, you were dipping out.
Huh. Do you want me to go out and come back in?
You can try.
Okay. Stand by. Right back.
Okay.
While he's doing that, do we have any more questions?
We have a question from the chat, but one for Dr. Josh at the moment. And we have another question. What's the background pic there? Okay, the background pic is from the intro. The blue seal is the GonnaGoForIt logo. Oh. I hope Dr. Josh can make it back. And I'm really happy that I put in a background filter on my microphone, because my dog is slobbering like crazy in the background. You haven't had a bull terrier, there's no dog that drinks as loud as a bull terrier. But we do have a question. Hold on. Question for both. Okay, Dr. Josh is back.
All right. I shut a bunch of windows off or down and ran a quick test. It seems like my upload speed.
That might help. So let's get through some questions while we have the conversation interrupted anyway. We had a question for you, Dr. Josh, from bigzebra.com. Question for Dr. Josh. Is it true that Proust didn't write Remembrance of Things Past and that the entire story was found in uniform on some clay tablets?
I do not know. I do not know. Yeah, I have no better answer.
That's the honest.
Why
That's
does
the
he ask me
honest.
questions?
That's the honest
Why
answer.
Why doesn't he ask me things that I know? I mean, come
Yeah.
on. He probably did that
Well,
on purpose, right?
We have one from Anton Gomez, former panel member of Anra's Quran lessons. Here's my question for both. How accurate is the story about Jesus saying not to stone an adulterous woman?
Another one that is outside of my area of expertise. PTown, go for it, man. What do you think?
Well, I think there's a lot of things we would call sin that are similar to being an adulterer, and it's really bad. And if Jesus is telling him, for you whoever hasn't sinned, throw the first stone, I think it's just talking about forgiveness. I mean, how accurate is it? I don't really understand the question.
Is this one of the pericopes that's debated?
Is it debated? Why?
I mean, it's been 15 years since I've messed with the New Testament at all. And when I did, I was a fundamentalist, so I don't know if I'm the right person to.
If the debate, I mean, Christ didn't come for the righteous, so I think that story amplifies what he means by that.
What is it? Oh, sorry, Peter. Are there other questions?
Questions are coming in like crazy now because apparently people now figured out, hey, we can ask questions, even though that's in the pinned tweet. But okay. Question from Mark Reed for PTown. Why don't you care about the historicity of the Bible? Don't you care if events actually happened?
Okay. Yeah. First of all, hi, Mark Reed. Hope you're doing well. Of course I care, but what I run into consistently, see, Dr. Josh, I can go off of the Bible, I can go off of the Torah, and I can pattern it with what I know about the New Testament. And with these two, you can demonstrate how it's divine, and you can demonstrate just through the text how the Torah was transcribed over time properly, as far as I can tell, without being a specialist. There's ways to do that. But when people come in and say, oh, the whole thing was it's just literature, it never happened, it was written way after, they do the same thing with Jesus never existed, he wasn't actually, didn't actually raise from the dead. Or the newest one is, oh, he wasn't nailed to a crucifix, it was in the shape of like an X. It's always something where ultimately, if you're just going to say that it's just literature and Jesus never existed, I just don't have enough time to fight those battles. I'm not going to go, and no offense to you, I just don't have time to go get a doctorate in having to prove that Jesus existed, so I have to operate with the tools that I do have and do have some time for.
Let me just to sort of maybe give a balanced perspective here, maybe. So there aren't many academics that I know, because I know what you mean, PTown. Like when we just sort of make these blanket statements, like, oh, well, like the Bible is not, historically reliable. Well, that's actually it's a nuanced thing, in two ways. One, you can't just, the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible is not just some like monolith. It's not just like one big thing, and you can either say it's historically reliable or it's not. Like there are lots of things in the Old Testament that are historically reliable, tons of things. Like and like so like I have in the book that you're reading, that the chapter on Ezekiel 26, like one of the things that I'm talking about over and over again is the historical reliability of what Ezekiel's saying in chapter 26 and in 29. So like many of the things that the prophets say and many of the things that, like First and Second Kings talk about, they're talking about events that actually happened. Right now, that doesn't mean that the supernatural interpretations that the writers put on those events, for example, 701 and Jerusalem being spared, that being due to some miraculous intervention, like that's not what I mean. But did Sennacherib lay siege and then the city? Yeah, I mean, like it's a thing that happened. So you can't just nobody should be saying nothing in the Old Testament is historically reliable. That's silly. And the other point I think that I would want to make is that, and this is for, I think people that want to make. I think people sometimes go too far to try to disprove things when it's not necessary for your position. So, for example, did Gilgamesh exist as a king? We got pretty good evidence that he did, right? And that would have been, in the 3rd millennium BCE. Does that mean that he, went to the cedar forest with Enkidu, who was, a human that was transformed from a mostly animal creature thrown down by the gods? And did he outrun the sun and through a tunnel? And did he go visit the end of the world to see the flood survive? Like, no, right? That just because he was a guy, just because he was a king of the city of Uruk, doesn't mean that all of the things that are written about him are true. And so I think, could Moses have existed? Sure. Could Abraham have existed? Yeah. I mean, probably not in any way that the stories depict necessarily. But could there have been a guy who may not have actually been named Abraham roaming around that the stories are based on? Sure. But just because that's possibly true, or just because, let's say, that is true, doesn't mean that it somehow makes, all of the Bible divinely inspired, right? So I think people, when they argue against oh no, there's no historical reliability, I think that's an unnecessary fight, if that makes sense.
Well, what I would like to know, Dr. Josh, is because I think I've watched a couple of videos and I know a little bit about who you are, where you were in a Christian family?
Mhm.
Okay. And you went to seminary.
Mhm.
You went into the Navy or the Air Force? Navy,
Air
right?
Force. Air Force.
Air Force.
Yeah.
Air Force as a chaplain. Is that what they
Mhm.
call them?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you wanted to continue your school. Maybe you did some more school, and then you got into Johns Hopkins.
Mhm.
And then the world came in on you.
Yeah. It's a good way
Yeah.
of
So,
saying it.
but what I want to know is, why were you? And now, were you like me? Would you categorize yourself as a young Earth creationist?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's because you believe the Bible was literally true.
Yes.
Okay. Why? That's what I want to know. Why were you a young Earth creationist?
Oh, yeah.
Literal.
So I was raised, I got saved when I was 5. And lest anyone out there listening thinks, oh, he got saved when he was 5, he wasn't really saved. The reason that I can see in my mind's eye where I was sitting on a bunk bed, crying my eyes out because my grandfather had told me that I was a sinner and that God was holy and didn't have any sin, and I couldn't go to heaven if I had sin, right? So I was going to hell if I didn't ask Jesus to save me from my sin, right? I guess I was relatively clever at 5 because that resonated with me.
Right.
And so I grew up in that household. My grandfather was an ordained Baptist minister. So, this was the interpretive model that I had, and what I would later, refer to as the literal grammatical historical hermeneutic, verbal plenary inspiration of the text. That's that's what I held to. And so given that, it made sense to me that if the text presented the past in the way that it does in its narrative form, and that Jesus seems to affirm that, right, in statements that he makes, and Paul seems to affirm it in statements that he makes, that in the end it was like, okay, well, I mean, like, hate to say, like, but if it's good enough for Jesus, right, it's good enough for Paul, it's good enough for Peter, who am I, right? And not that I ever got to that point of thinking, because it was like, well, obviously Jesus says this is the case, so that's the case.
Was there anything evidence-based that you held fast to?
No, I think this was the good news, bad news, I suppose, of my my interpretive model. Things like apologetics weren't terribly important to me, because the defense of the text, there were certain things, like I remember going through seminary, we had like an apologetics class, but it was like, okay, look, here's how you explain how Jonah could have been in the belly of a great fish for 3 days and 3 nights, right? And how that's, realistic. Or, here's how you can explain Jonah walking through Nineveh for 3 days, right? Like, like the big things, no, right? I mean, it's just, but it wasn't terribly relevant, because from like the standpoint of evolution or of science, like, and I've said this before, but I mean, like, the reason I never got into science really at all. And so when people would ask me about it or ask me about evolution, I would say, look, when Adam was created in the Garden of Eden, how old did he look? And the way that I think the text sort of reads is he's at least a young man, right? So he doesn't look 20 seconds old when he is 20 seconds old, right? And so he's created with apparent age. And so when people would say, well, if you cut down a tree in the Garden of Eden, would there be rings in it? If you dug down into the ground, would there be layers? Yeah, but it's because God created the world to appear older, because that's what he did with Adam. Why couldn't he do that with the rest of creation? And that solved it for me.
That was enough. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
it was, so I guess, well, this is what I run into with Christians now, and they're everywhere, even pastors in the church. It is kind of shrugged off if you have tough questions. And a lot of them just grew up in Christian homes and haven't actually been in the battlefield, or actually have had an empirical approach to scripture and tried to look at things objectively. I don't think there's anything you can do that and still have faith. I think that's an important aspect of faith. And this is just since you mentioned Jonah, when I finally started becoming a Christian, I read Jonah. What I see is he's in the belly of a fish, and he describes seeing mountains and being between the roots of the mountains in the sea. And then I know from my meaner studies that it was an important discovery to find that there's mountains in the sea, and that, like, a lot of the big deep trenches, the parts where it looks like I would argue the earth cracked open during the flood, that it's like being between the roots of the mountains. And it's just noteworthy. You put enough of these little things together, and I think that it has an impression on you. So even though to the man of me, the story is ridiculous, but there's an aspect of me that sees that there is some hidden truth there to be revealed. And that's my approach. Did you, but like now you you say that you're an atheist. Everyone has a different definition of that. Do you have a definition?
You know, I would say that, and please, all the philosophers out there, forgive me. I'm not a philosophy guy. I would say on the proposition, a God exists, I would say that that is probably false. I don't believe that that's true. Or I guess do it in the negative on the proposition that no gods exist. I would say that's probably true. But that's probably a terrible definition, honestly, of an atheist. But that's sort of where I fall. Like,
if you write the atheist handbook to the Old Testament, you have to be called an atheist.
yeah, right. Like I have to be. No, it's funny because when I came online, people were asking me that, like, what are you? I don't know. And so somebody asked me, I think is how it went down. Somebody asked me, like, do you know that no gods exist? Do you know that, like, for certain? I'm like, no.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, well, you're an agnostic because you don't know. Like, okay, like, that's fine. But then somebody pointed out that if you don't believe that there are any gods, that makes you an atheist. So it's like, okay, that's fine. Like, to be honest, that question is not the most relevant to me, because, like, I guess I don't really have a problem. Like when I hear people give, and if this is going off track, stop me. But like when I hear people give like cosmological arguments, right, or these philosophical arguments that are meant to get to like a first cause, an uncaused cause, or something. Like I say ho hum, okay, like that. Like that doesn't really do much for me, because from my perspective, okay, I'll grant that. Let's say that's true. There's an uncaused cause. There's some God out there. That deity doesn't, as we're defining it, at the furthest that we've gotten, that deity doesn't require anything of me, right? But so somebody that's making that argument online, generally speaking, is arguing for the Christian God, and ultimately wants to say that this text is the one that we should be living by. I start there. I start on that end of the argument. My wife is an Anglican, right? My wife's a Christian.
I don't know what that is, but
do you know what an Episcopalian is?
No.
I'm pretty. I mean, you would probably call them very liberal Christians. It's the Church of England. The Episcopal Church is sort of like I want to say the American version of it, but they're very close theologically speaking. But like, I taught Sunday school before before COVID hit, at an Episcopal church that we went to every Sunday.
Wait, so you're a recent atheist then?
No, I became an agnostic or an atheist or whatever we're calling it. I stopped believing in God in 2009.
But you were teaching Sunday school?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, help me.
I mean, the thing is,
you're qualified.
I mean, it's not. See this. I think this is the part where I suspect you would say that they're too liberal. Those Christians are too liberal, because there's a difference between me teaching about, let's say, what we can say about, I don't know, the fall of Tyre in Ezekiel 26, just because we were talking about that, or the lack of the fall of Tyre, from a historical standpoint, and them saying, well, we have a theological understanding of that event and why it transpired that way. I can teach on the historical.
Kids?
Oh no, these are adults. This is adult Sunday school. Yeah, and they asked me.
And they knew that you weren't a believer. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So, because here's the thing, like, those classes are. Do you know what reader response is?
No.
You probably do. Like if you've ever gone to a Sunday school class and there's somebody that maybe doesn't, maybe the teacher like rotates an adult Sunday school class that sort of rotates, and they have like a little booklet that they're going through, and they read a passage and they look around and say, "No, what does that scripture say to you? What does it mean to you?" And everybody kind of says, "Well, to me, it means like this, or it speaks to me like this." That's reader response. It's like me holding up a painting to you and saying, "What does this say to you?" And you look at it and you go, "Oh man, well, the way it contrasts, that really speaks to me and the struggle that I'm going through today," or something. It doesn't have anything to do with what the painter meant, the artist meant when he did it. It's just, what does it say to you? And so a lot of these, ultimately, a lot of these classes sort of boil down to that, which I think is good. Sorry, we veered.
I got sidetracked there for a second. Well, I since I have you on here, I always bring this up. We don't have to stay on this because you mentioned cosmological arguments aren't really your forte and never have been important to you. But the Bible does say that we can clearly see him through the things that he's made. We can clearly see that there's a creator God, in essence, is what the Bible heads to. Absent of religion, absent of a book that you and I, would disagree about. When you look at nature or you look at the world that we observe, do you see God at all in that? And I'll have to say, I use the argument all the time. And it's mostly because I want to see where people are coming from. And you might see the chat get excited about it. But I find it an uncanny coincidence that there's, say, the moon and the sun, right, are the same size. You seem like a fair, honest person. Would you consider that possibly being evidence that God made a light for the day and a light for the night?
Sorry, maybe let me make sure I understood your question. When you say they're the same size.
Yes, they're about the same size from our vantage point.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Eclipse.
Yeah, I gotcha. I gotcha.
Now you have and you look immediately. If you just want to go to the lunar recession, yes, the moon's moving away an inch a year, and if you look at it for a large time scale, it wasn't like that in the past, and it won't be like that in the future. I get all that.
You already know way more about it than I do, PTown.
Right. So it's just a simple thing. Like, dude, there's two things that look big in the sky, and they happen to be the same size, and we can verify that when they align. It's just a pattern recognition tool. In this case, can you see that could be evidence of a creator because he possibly made that for us just to see?
I mean, is that possible? Sure. Do I think that's the case? No.
Okay.
And to sort of maybe answer your question, like, when I look out into nature, into the world, do I see that as evidence for God? Again, I'm coming from a position of no formal training whatsoever in the sciences, so nobody should hear what I say and say, "Oh, I hang my hat on what Josh said there." Don't do that. But me personally, one of the things that I know, looking back in history, particularly in the ancient Near East, is that we used to think for a very long time that natural phenomena were deities, right? And so when I see that pattern, and again, it's an inductive thing, but when I see that pattern, I say, okay, well, what is it? My friend Michael, the Canadian atheist, always says, and I'm sure he got it from somewhere because he always quotes somebody, which is awesome. But he says, we've never gone, oh, that thing that we thought was natural actually turned out to be God. Like, we've never done that. It's always been the other way around. And I suspect that that's going to continue to be the case as we move forward. But all that being said, and I'll shut up, but all that being said, if tomorrow, somebody were to hold up irrefutable evidence, right? Look, there is a God that created the world. Okay. Like that doesn't really, I'll go, that's cool.
Right.
Right.
Okay. It's
Because
not your thing. Well, let me try and bring this back, and I don't mean to cut you off, but let me bring
Yeah,
this
sure.
back to our topic, which I've done this multiple times now, and you go to Numbers 2 and you draw out the camp. And if you approach scripture the way that I do, which is quite literally, and I don't think I need to be a Hebrew scholar to be able to do this, and if you put aside what other documents outside of what the Bible say, you do what was commanded of Moses to do, and you draw out this encampment. It's in the shape of a cross. Have you done this before?
No.
Well, I find it kind of uncanny, an uncanny coincidence that this group of people, according to a book not written by Christians, but written by a whole nother group of people, a whole different religion, accidentally put it in their book that another group of people who would say that their Messiah was nailed to thousands of years later in the same shape. I think that is evidence of something.
Have you, so statistics are not my thing.
Yes.
But have you ever done gematria? Do you know what that is?
I don't know.
And like, there's only one form that I've done it. There was a cult. I probably shouldn't call them that because they wouldn't like it, but it's called the Lord Rael. And he's a guy down in Baja, Mexico, who says that he is like Jesus and King Arthur reincarnated or something. But anyway, he's got his own cult down there. But one of the things that they do, they're big on Facebook. They use this computer program that takes the Hebrew Bible and puts it into rows, right? Takes all the vowel points out.
Oh, I have a book on. Yeah, I'm not
Okay.
big. I think it's something to pay attention to, but yeah, you could basically take the whole Hebrew Bible and you can make it a bigger and a smaller square, and then you can see all the different patterns. And
so they made this into a computer program.
Correct. Yeah, I understand how it works.
So I have it.
Oh, really? How much is it? It's like $20, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not that. It might have been 50
if I need you to throw some stuff in there, I'll let you know.
The reason that I got it though is because this was one of the main things that they use. Is and they'll put things in there. They'll like take a screenshot of these words in Hebrew that are overlapping and crossing each other, and it'll say things like Baja, Mexico, Rael, and it's like, if you look at it, you're like, my God, like, because I'm looking at it, the first time I saw it, I was like, that's weird, because I can read the Hebrew, right? And I'm like, that's what that says, right? That's weird. The problem is that if
you can do that though,
I bought the program. There's a video of it where I debated one of these guys.
Well, I'm not a big fan of it because people will compare me to it, and that's I don't ascribe to.
But I guess I guess the point that I'm trying to make though is that really seems convincing, like statistically. If you don't have statistics, I'm not sure. But like the fact that I could put in there like Josh Bowen is Messiah, and it like boom popped up,
boom,
right? Yeah. Like it's there. It's sort of like, and it crosses with all kinds of other stuff like YouTube, or like you could really make it. You can really make it intricate, and the guy really did not like it when I did it. And it's just, I guess it's just to say that.
But this one is simple though, Josh. This isn't like some conspiracy and I'm familiar with how they did it with that. It's interesting. It's something. Once I got a grasp of what they did, I kind of stepped away because it's too overgeneralizable. Like what you just said, you could put Josh Bowen, Messiah, and then it has YouTube, and it's this is simple though. If you draw out the encampment according to what Scripture says, it's in the shape of a cross. It's just simple. It's
So
not you don't need a Bible code or subscribe to a channel to get the code. You can go do it yourself. And hint, it takes only a couple minutes if you go to the summary part of the paragraph.
so let me ask you a question in response.
Sure.
Let's assume it for a second. If in that same book of Numbers, I could show you where the text says X city was destroyed by the Israelites, and we can go there archaeologically and look at it, and it didn't get destroyed. Or if I could take you to just the next section of the story, right, into the book of Joshua, and we could just walk through the sites. What would that?
Yeah.
Which one weighs more for you?
Well, here I want to hear your opinion on this. I mean, are you saying it's not significant or it's not true, or
Which
because
part?
when it comes to the shape of the encampment,
I'm
numbers
just
two,
I'm
being the
just
shape of a cross.
to me. So I haven't worked through that particular aspect of Numbers 2. So I don't even know. But if I just grant it, I'm asking you
Unless if you granted it, what does that have an impact on you?
No, I mean the shape of
It wouldn't either way.
No.
Okay,
The shape,
okay. I just want to clarify.
that shape is, that's not a
Yeah, you have
substantive
it.
shape.
You have it. Yeah, it's a common shape. Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
but it does seem like it. That's why I'm asking, because it does seem like it means a lot to you, and I don't want to take that from you.
When you get enough of these things, that I think it's profoundly, yeah, I think it is profound. But yeah, when you get enough of these little coincidences that
But then
you are not small.
But
yeah,
like the big things. So like I hear you, right? If you had some bunch
that's
of
pretty
little,
damn big to my mind, honestly. I mean,
so do you think that it's bigger than the sites of Arad, Heshbon, Dibon, Jericho,
if I personally went and I dug into the dirt, there's a few things if you're saying, oh well, this first of all, we're operating in a realm where it's really hard to prove that you can tell which time frame anything happened according to dirt. I would argue,
it's not
but
actually.
okay.
So I
operating under that premise, though, you also have to presume that can you see a lot of people will build on cities of rubble. People take things that are knocked down and reuse them to build their homes. So if a wall was knocked down, I would definitely, again, and this is why I think it would take a lot of time that I don't know if I'm ready to invest.
Yeah.
But
So
I think it's worth. But I did. I actually, like I said, I listened to your book, and I remember you explaining that, because we can say, for example, that we know that there was a local flood during this time period, and let's say the raising of the city happened afterwards, but the Bible says it happened before. During this time period, it could be a couple hundred years off, which would therefore make it so the Bible can't be literally true. So, that was probably a very poor
I don't remember talking
description.
I don't remember talking about a flood.
I think you're talking about like the residue of a flood being between two positions that were.
Just yeah, I see.
I was trying to describe. I understand somewhat of where you get to.
Sorry.
How
you
you
say
construct
flood,
it.
I got you. When you say flood, I think you might be hearing me say like Genesis 6-9 flood, or maybe that's what I was hearing.
I just assumed it was just a flood based
like
on
an
the
inundation
dirt in the ground.
of
and we know that this local flood happened at this time, and
a levee
use
gave way at a canal or something, and went over and hit this particular city that was along the canal.
My point is I'm starting to get an idea of the metrics used to calculate these time periods. I'm still obviously far from understanding.
So go with me for a second then, just hypothetically.
Okay.
If you read evangelical scholars, right, people that are archaeologists that have theological commitments that are close to your own,
I really do not give people much credit.
but let's just,
yeah.
if you're reading them, along with all of the other, quote unquote liberal scholars, critical scholars, that are all saying the same thing. Yeah, city of Jericho, city of Ai, like like the city of Ai was abandoned for 1,000 years by the time the Israelites were supposed to get there, right? It's so much so that like somebody like James Hoffmeyer would say, well, maybe maybe it's just not the right site. Maybe that's not really Ai. Maybe the other city that's like, a couple miles away, maybe that's supposed to be Ai, right? They're recognizing this doesn't work, right? This one doesn't work. If that's the case, that I could point you to 5 cities right now that are supposed to have been razed, leveled, burned, that were abandoned at the time that the Israelites were supposed to have come. How significant would that be to you if you were like, yes, the archaeology is true there? Like, I think the archaeologists are correct there.
I'm just not one to get my information from. I don't hang my hat on what other people say, right? So, and maybe it's a fault of mine, but whether I don't care how many degrees they have, and if they claim to be Christian, I'm not going to hold them over the Bible. Like, but like I'll definitely listen to them and go look at stuff myself, right?
So that forgive me, that confuses me a little. And then, sorry, Peter, I know you've come in. Because it sounded like what you were saying earlier is that, unless I just misheard you, which is entirely possible, that like you had empirical, like evidential basis for your beliefs.
Well, what I was trying to give you was an example of like Numbers 2, how it's in the shape of a cross. And I think that it's just an example similar to that where I said there's a pattern with the moon and the sun.
So you,
but how I would define, like my studies have not been in anywhere near where your realm of work is. I can see how it definitely would be impactful to you, but
would you say that most of your evidence is intertextual? Like it's with, okay, I got you.
It is. So like I have to operate on the presumption that the Jews in the Torah, and I could demonstrate how it has been passed down, correctly throughout time, how there's little ways to do that. But once someone throws a wrench in there and says, oh, Jesus never existed as an example, or it's why
I see what you're saying.
I would say like Dr. Josh Bowen wouldn't be my arch nemesis. It's like it's an arena that it's just not where God has put me yet, right?
I see. Yeah. I understand what you're saying now. It's I understand what you're saying.
Sorry, and I don't know
if I may jump in. If I may jump in, we have a few questions that are relating to the topic at hand. So if possible, I would like to throw those in.
People are coming at me, aren't they? Just coming at me.
Oh yes, because I'll take that one first. Mark Caesar says, "Can you ask Dr. Josh whether he would consider wearing a fez to complement his bow tie?" So
bow ties are cool.
But yeah, we do have a few.
I would.
We do have a few questions, and I'm not taking them in order, but more how related they are. Mark Reed asked a question for PTown. If they had made their camp in the shape of a crescent, would that make Islam true?
If it would be noteworthy, Mark.
Okay.
I don't know how to answer that question. I think it's beautifully poetic and noteworthy that according to the Bible, the camp was in the shape of a cross, and that my Savior was nailed to a cross years later. I think that's one of thousands of beautiful things. It shows you the extremes that God went to for us.
Then we have from Deviant Outcast question, and this is a fun one because I was part of the website where most of the pictures that creationists use were made in a Photoshop contest. So, question: one of the issues I can't wrap my head around is the people lived so much longer back then, and also they were giants. We do have their mummies and less fleshy remains as well.
Less fleshy.
Yeah. So, do you believe those existed, PTown? I think that was the question. She ran out of characters.
I believe the Bible is true. Yeah, the Bible says that people lived a lot longer back then. When it comes to actual giants, it's gigantus, I think, is the word that we get the word giants from, which is translated out of Dr. Josh Bowen, having a degree in this, would know better than me, but I think it's out of the Nephilim. But long story short, when it comes to, it doesn't actually mean giants, but there are giants in the Bible. Obviously, you have Goliath and his brothers, for example, and then we also have, I think, archaeological evidence that there's been some giants found. And actually, we have some giants now too. There's that gene.
We have archaeological evidence that giants have been found.
So I don't know of any.
No, this is why I mentioned that most of the pictures that we see online of archaeologists digging up giants, that was a Photoshop contest, and back then I wasn't good enough to submit anything. But one of the people that I interacted with a lot got in third, I think, on that contest, and there were some amazing pictures that you wouldn't think were fake.
We have a lot of well, there's a lot of fossils of giant things.
Yeah, but not humans.
Before the flood, or
not humans.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just saying that what the Bible says. Were there giants? Yes.
Okay. Dr. Josh, you
some
wanted
big
to
people, and we still have some big people, and I don't know if it's a recessive gene. We would call it a disease, but there's some really big people probably still alive today we would call giants.
Yeah. I was just going to say that Michael Heiser, in his book, title of which Unseen Realm, I think, is the one that has it. He's got a section, if I'm remembering correctly, about why we don't have archaeological evidence for giants, and he makes a comment about mummification and how there wasn't mummification in Canaan. But I think the whole point, if I'm remembering correctly, is that he didn't have any evidence to cite, and he was trying to explain why. Because I think he certainly did, as far as I understand his arguments, did hold to there being giants in the land.
Michael Heiser did.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
What the Bible says. I mean, kind of hard to get around that.
Well, so we did have a guest on our show who told us that the Nephilim made it with reptiles. That's how we got dinosaurs. Kidding. So
that would be quite an extreme view.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes, and he was going to get evidence, but then completely vanished. Okay, next question. This is from Jen with one N. PTown, given all the geological, biological, and archaeological and historical evidence against biblical accuracy, do you think they are all wrong? Is it a conspiracy?
I do. Well, conspiracy might not be the right word, but I think it's pretty clear that there is a spiritual warfare going on. You can see it in the world that we live in today. I definitely think it's been going on throughout time. There's a mission by the adversary to infiltrate, and at the highest levels, especially academic, especially the science is falsely so called, to have an agenda to complicate things and to lead people astray. So if you want to call it a conspiracy, you can, but I would say in this sense, the Bible is right about that as well.
Dr. Josh?
I guess like it has not been my experience in academia that they're outside of evangelical circles. I don't see theological commitments influencing interpretation of data. I don't see that. Not saying that it doesn't happen because I can't see everything, but in my experience, like what I mean is there were several professing Christians in our department, in the Near Eastern Studies department, in all the different fields. And I don't ever remember anybody making an argument and saying having it colored by their theological commitment. It doesn't really factor in. Certainly not in the same way, if that made sense.
Okay. Next question.
And I do want to emphasize this though, because I don't want people to misunderstand me. I believe Dr. Josh when he says that. What the Bible says is that, it's a hidden dishonesty. And I think it's important to see the word hidden in that text. So I don't think that it's I think there's a bigger power at play most of the time.
You're saying it's an unconscious bias?
A lot of the time, yeah.
I got you.
Okay. Then and I don't think we're going to have time for that, but I'll read it out anyway. Iron Charioteer says, can you ask Dr. Josh if he can read some lines from Atrahasis and show PTown how it compares to the Bible flood story?
Yeah, we probably don't have time to do that, but if the whole chapter 7 of volume 2 of the Atheist Handbook is dedicated to the influence of ancient Near Eastern and Mesopotamian texts upon Genesis 1 through 11, like in in detail. So that would be, if people are interested in that, that's a place to go.
Okay. And then I'm going to ask Jen with one end for forgiveness, because Jen wanted to have a conversation with PTown. She put in another question. I think that would be a good one to save. I'll set up a conversation between you and PTown. I think I already mentioned that to him. So let's do it. Let's do it live. That would be a better thing. Short one. Anton Gomez. Another question for you both. Do you know about discrepancies in the story of Moses between Judaism and Christianity? And would it be a case against the Bible accurate?
I'm not aware of any contradictions. Josh, what is she referring to?
I'm not sure specifically.
Well, they're not referring to anything specific. They're asking if you know of any discrepancies in the story of Moses between Judaism and Christianity.
Nothing's coming to mind. That doesn't mean, obviously, that there's not. I think perhaps the bigger issue outside of the historicity factor is there does seem to be sort of a common trope or motif. I think it's motif. I always get them mixed up. About like an exposed child. So like Sargon, the birth legend of Sargon is essentially the Moses story. Where Sargon is put in a basket, put in the river, pulled out of the water by Aki, the water drawer. because it's sort of this like coming from mysterious backgrounds, mysterious origins is a big thing for a ruler during the period. So I mean, like I think that's something to be considered. But sorry, that's not the question that they asked. Be quiet now.
Okay, last one for now. Another one from Deviant Outcast. How come we have evidence of multiple different written language way before the time of the Tower of Babel? How would PTown explain that if it's in the Bible? Wasn't a legit answer.
I'm assuming that there was writing and stuff before the flood and before the Tower of Babel, Dr. Josh. I'm not sure if that's the case, but
wasn't the Tower of Babel when they confused the languages?
and then they all had one language, and then the languages were confused and dispersed throughout. Yeah. Again, it goes back to it where I just don't contend in that field. I don't have the spade and the shovel out digging in the ground, and I don't know enough about that. I will give you there is a portion of ignorance on my end. It's not a topic that I specialize in.
That is,
but I'm still glad that we got to talk and hang out, Josh.
Yeah, definitely. And that was I thank you, because I think that's an incredibly honest answer, and a very respectable one, because it's, and I probably will have to go just because I have to get up at 4 tomorrow morning. But this has been fun. But I do appreciate, first of all, you've been incredibly cordial, and I think this has been a very nice, easy conversation, relaxing conversation, and I do understand it. I think I do understand your position, because it really is the position I think that I held, because I would have said something very similar to sort of like a, it's almost like a closed system sort of interpretive model, because if you're doing it like I did, Jesus is the Son of God, he's not going to say something that's incorrect, right? So, and if Paul and Peter are inspired by the Holy Spirit, they're not going to say things that are incorrect. And so if they're saying things about the Old Testament, then, I can also hang my hat on those things. And so the necessity of like having to prove things archaeologically or whatever, particularly when man can go out there and mess stuff up, like I get it.
Well,
Sorry.
I want to be,
Good.
Yeah, I want to be generous to your time if you need to go. I got your email. Maybe we can stay in touch, and I'll finish listening to your book.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And definitely, next time maybe we'll have like get some real sparks flying. And I'm just kidding.
I was just going to say that. So we've had a couple of these shows, and we've so far we only had Muslim versus ex-Muslim, and both of those conversations were pretty cordial and pretty respectful, coming from both sides. I'm actually really happy that was the same thing for this show, because people might know I'm not really looking for dumpster fires. I think they don't help when we have conversations like these. I always think it if you have to go to insults or jabs at people, it just means that your point isn't strong enough. So, but we're about an hour and a half in, so that's usually when I say maybe we should wrap it up. Is there a last point you want to address, or did you think you covered everything?
I feel pretty good.
PTown?
Yeah, just don't forget to subscribe to Dr. Josh's channel, and if you want mine, I think it's in the description too. I'll start making content here soon.
Okay.
and having more discussions like this.
Yes. Links for both of you are in the description. So if you
Thank you both.
want a book, there are a couple of links in the description. If you want to know something about slavery, which didn't come up. It didn't.
Oh,
it
yeah,
didn't come up. So
I should probably mention that just very, very quickly, because you wanted me to mention it when we talked on Twitter. Yeah, so I'm working on the second edition of Did the Old Testament Endure Slavery? And it is, I don't even know what to call it, because like I want to say like extremely revised and expanded, because it's now more than double in length of the original. It's probably going to be like 2.5 times the length.
it got
but
extra
it's gonna-
slavery.
It's really one of the big things that it does is it goes much more in depth into ancient Near Eastern law collections. So there's a whole chapter about what were the ancient Near Eastern law collections and does it matter? Because there's a big Christian apologetic about that. There's a whole chapter dedicated to the New Testament, early Christianity. There's a whole chapter dedicated to the antebellum South. There's 2 appendices that are essentially just commentaries on ancient Near Eastern laws about slavery. So every law about slavery and the law collections and commentary with it. So I think it'll be a pretty handy resource if people want to talk about that topic.
Okay. Well, aren't you getting tired? That is a thing that people will just. You're the go-to man, I think, at the moment when it comes to slavery in the Bible.
I'm actually going to go on Cosmic Skeptics channel in April, I think, to talk about slavery. So yes, it is. And that's okay. I mean, as soon as people stop saying slavery's okay, I'll stop talking about it. But like, they keep saying it. They said it yesterday. I don't have a problem with slavery. It's like, oh my God.
Okay. I do wanna make a little shout out. We've got Lawrence in the side chat from Milwaukee Atheists, and apparently we have Tomer. Have you met Tomer? Dr. Josh? Tomer is our Hebrew guy on Ra's Blasphemers Bible. And he always comes extremely well prepared with lots of notes. I think that might be a good thing. We don't have a show for that. Would be good having you and Tomer change ideas. That would be
It just doesn't sound like you need me on that show, frankly.
Yeah, we do. Who wouldn't need? I'm extremely happy that this is the second time we had you on our channel. We're a tiny channel, so we do appreciate the time that you give us. So, and I wouldn't have invited you for only that reason. I know you're a busy man. We're a tiny channel. There are bigger channels where you can get the word out and more people will see it. So, I want to thank you for coming on. PTown, as I said, you're in demand. There are 2 people waiting in line to do a similar thing like this with you. So people can like this, I think, and subscribe to the channel to see what happens with PTown in future. And stick around for a few more seconds, Dr. Josh, and I will run the intro. So yeah, we're gonna have a few more guests, maybe even this week. I've got a Christian contacted me that I've asked to come on a long time ago, and they didn't have time, and they shot me a message. So They're free this week. If I can get a co-host in time, maybe I'll do it alone. We'll see what happens. I want to thank everyone in the side chat for the questions, and we see you all next time. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.